Hello and welcome back to another Hallowoods weekly Q&A behind the scenes backstage live stream. Thank you so much for tuning in as always. If you're watching this in the present day, well, happy Pensive Day and happy Father's Day. Hope you're enjoying this lovely time in June. If you're watching, you can click over to the YouTube chat and you can submit questions there that we will answer in some time during the stream. If you're watching this in the far future, well, the moment has passed, but there will probably be future Q&As you could submit questions to. Patrons have the unique and blessed power of submitting questions in advance. So, speaking of which, we do have a little bit of a pile of questions in the patrons ask box today. So I will get into those shortly. At this very moment, the main project left is really just getting a couple weeks ahead on Hello from the Hallowoods, both for an upcoming trip towards the end of June, but then a bit of a longer stint away from the writing desk come this August, when a certain large board games convention is happening and much cross-country driving will have to occur. So I will really be just trying to tide the Hallowoods over in terms of work and get us all set up so that we have multiple weeks of episodes ready to roll out, unattended by me, and leave you with some content while we were gone. Worst case scenario, there could be a break of probably either 1 or 2 weeks in early August. We will hope not for that eventuality, but we shall see, depending on how much I can churn out over these next couple of weeks. In the meantime, it will also be a good time for book writing. 100 Eyes in the Dark, the first Hallowoods tie-in novel, following a young Nick and a younger human friend Amaryllis in the 70s, will be that's still in the gears of the publishing industry. As I've said before, it is chugging along nicely. I am hoping sometime by the end of the year, fingers crossed, to have an ETA for you on when it shows up. But there's kind of no new news on that front just for the moment. The other thing is that there's another book to write. There's a Lady Ethel autobiography that I have to muster up the marketing spirit to pen. So I'll be working on that over the summer and hoping to have a first draft of that done by the end of the year. And hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll be able to get at least a first draft of a book done each year as time goes on. So this will really be book 2 in this installment of Hallowoods spin-off works. But that's the hope. That said, we do have a couple questions in the patrons box, so I will probably skip over to those. Leech asks, appropriately, between first thinking up the plot and now, how much has changed about 100 Eyes in the Dark? This is a good question. 100 Eyes in the Dark has gone at this point through about 3 recognizable drafts. And I think between those 3 drafts, a couple of the things that have happened are, I think, a better fleshing out of Nick and this other character's relationship. I think that's just kind of grown and worked out a little bit better as time has gone on. I think Amaryllis, by this 3rd draft, feels a lot better as a character, like just has a lot more internally going on for her than she did in the first draft. I often find in my very first attempt at a piece, a character will come across a little bit flat, and it takes a little bit of time to get to know them and figure out what makes them tick and what makes them interesting and what makes them react to the world in a way that people would want to see. And so it takes some time to get to that level of understanding for most of my characters. And so I've been happy to find it has kind of happened over the course of these drafts, but definitely more work on it and revisiting the story and trying to figure out new angles for it has been good. I think another thing that has happened has been a bit of a shift in the scale of the story. Originally, my very first ideas for it were that it would really all be told from kind of this ground level perspective from Amaryllis. But as drafting and feedback and deconstructing and reconstructing the book has gone on, I think one of the things that has happened is that there's been a little bit more of a broadening of perspective. There's a couple people we tune into over the course of the book. And I think that allows us to talk about things a little bit more as well, or explore more angles of this particular time period and more like various perspectives around some of the themes of this book, because we get to see them through different eyes. And so we don't always just see what Amaryllis sees and feel what Amaryllis feels, but we get some other perspectives as well. And I think that has really kind of allowed the book to talk a little bit more about what I wanted it to talk about than, these earlier first drafts were capable of. So I think those are the biggest things that have changed. Overall, though, in terms of plot, I would say the plot itself is still very similar. The pacing of certain things has changed. The distance between certain things has changed. But overall, like, it is very, very, very similar to like the first draft in terms of the actual plot points and things that happen. So it is still very much the same book in terms of structure, I think. A couple of like switchovers and changes aside. But overall, there haven't been any like groundbreaking changes to the story itself. The story, I think, was pretty set from day one, just because I knew kind of where it begins, and I knew where it ended, and I knew there were like certain beats I wanted to meet along the way in between those two things. And so even though other parts of it, other like connecting points, other bits of the story have changed, all of those like major beats have still kind of stayed intact, I think. So it's not super far off from where it was, in my paper books that it was written in on the shelf. But just, I think you'll find it's a little bit more developed, a little bit more nuanced, a little bit more like multi-perspective than it was in those very first drafts. I cannot wait for y'all to get to read this book. It has been a long wait for people who've been tuned in to the Hallowoods at large, because the plot of this book and the premise and the like idea for it came around at the same time as Hallowoods season 1 was being written. And really the idea was that certain things from the first season especially, but then onwards as well, as I've gotten a chance to reference more things, like the 100 Eyes in the Dark contains a bunch of, I wouldn't quite say maybe answers to like certain outstanding running bits or questions throughout the show. And so, yeah, they were really conceived at the same time, but it was the case that I wanted to make a podcast first and start getting work out to people that way. And so the book really sat unwritten for like a year or a year and a half. And people who are familiar with the show during our first months would have heard about this potential book that was coming up. They were excited about the concept. And then later it came to actually writing the book, and people have been still, stoked that it's getting written, but they've had to sit and wait while I wrote the book and re-edited the book and re-edited the book. And now they still have to wait while it makes its way through and like publishing gets set up. And I kind of dive into the world of print media, which is something I haven't dealt with yet. So it's going to have been something like a 4-year wait time for certain fans by the time they finally get to read this book. But that said, hopefully it will not be 4 years between this one and the next one. And I can't wait to start getting these actually out into the world. So I'm very excited about it. We have a question in the Ask box from Liam. Liam says, "Happy Pensive Day. Does Scout City still celebrate Pensive Day? And have they introduced any new holidays during the time skip?" Yes. Of course they still celebrate Pensive Day. It's an institution at this point. They probably, I don't know if they go a little overboard with it. They might go a little overboard with it. They've got there's a city to like fund things now. But I'm sure they do. Other holidays that might have occurred, the Hallowoods especially Scout City, tends to have a fairly denominational list of holidays. Essentially, any holiday that people want on the calendar has been added to the calendar. And then beyond that, I'm sure they've got some that have been invented of their own. The end of the bark beetle infestation was a couple years back, is probably akin to we celebrate our Independence Day. Um, there's probably been a couple of others as well. I think whatever day it was that they established some kind of peace treaty, more or less, with at least one of the Frogland splinter groups, that's probably up there. Yeah, I would say there's a couple. Maybe we'll explore a little bit more as we go. Although our characters in Scout City right now are not having a wonderful time to celebrate, unfortunately. Um, let's see. And last question from the patrons ask box, and then I see we have a couple in the chat, is from Kilroy. All right. This deals this question deals with some mild spoilers from season 4. I guess the previous question also did. Kilroy says, "Howdy. When entering Stitchery's tailor shop, Vincent notices that there are 7 band uniforms on mannequins in the back. Did they keep the old ones and back then made one for Diggory, or are they for some reason making a new set?" I don't know if we know. They're sort of ominous set dressing, if you will. Yeah, I guess we'll find out. But I'm not sure that that has an answer that I can give in the form of a Q&A. I would call it, if nothing else, a fascination with the past. We have a couple of questions from the chat. Archie says, "Will the books be available in an e-reader format?" If I have anything to say about it, yes. I think it's fairly part and parcel for books that are going on shelves to also have an e-reader, digital release these days. So I would expect highly that would be the case. I would also love to make an audiobook available if I can convince them to do it. We'll see on that front in a while, but it would obviously, because so much of the show has been delivered vocally, and really I've just been reading hundreds of thousands of words of story to you all over the course of the last several years. I would definitely enjoy the chance to release it in a variety of formats. Audiobook would be great. E-reader would be great. So we'll keep you posted, but I do hope so. I would expect so. Archie also asks, "Thank you for asking so many questions. Are fans of our show and are fans of your show and books allowed to make our own merch?" The short answer is yes. I love to see fans creating their own merch. There's a couple, I believe, on Redbubble that already do sell Hallowoods merch. The way I see it is that merch existing out there and people having pins and stickers and shirts and posters and these sorts of things, this is essentially free advertising for the show in a way. And we're not trying to start a merch empire here. The Hallowoods fortune will not be forged in t-shirts. Pennies off of print-on-demand t-shirts at that. All of our in-house merch is close to offered at cost. When you factor in shipping and production and all the things that we pay for, we make almost no money from merch. However, I just think it's important that there's opportunities for people to be able to get something that has the show on it, or have a t-shirt, or have a pin, or have a sticker. That said, we are at some point going to try and overhaul our merch collections. I've been saying this for a while now, and that sometime is always in the future, because it takes a lot of work out of me. Last 3 years. So, that said, you make merch. make cool merch. You can tag us in it if you make it, because we love to see it and promote it out. The only caveat is don't use my art for it. You can draw your own art. You can say it's a hello from the Hallowoods thing. You can put it out there. That's okay. I just don't copy and paste my own episode covers or something and then put it on a t-shirt, because I could do that myself. And I would prefer people to get to see your own art and your own creativity at play anyways. So yeah, that's pretty much it. You can make your own merch. You can sell your own merch. You can call it Hallowwood stuff. Just don't actually lift the art itself from the show. Similarly, Archie asks, do you think about Hallowoods getting an animated show like D&D's Vox Machina or League of Legends Arcane? Yes. Originally, this was, I think, possibly the first adaptation of the Hallowoods that I was thinking about. Because I cycled through several different ideas or ways to present this story before I settled on podcast. And for a while, I had just watched Over the Garden Wall, which was a big inspiration. I was a big fan of shows like Adventure Time and Steven Universe. I had actually gotten into animation originally, and I was pitching shows out to a company called Frederator. And Frederator has made the pilots for Adventure Time and Steven Universe and a dozen other famous animated shows. And so I actually did make several show pitches to that company, trying to get animated shows picked up and off the ground. And I can't say that they ever were super impressed with what they saw, but it was a great learning experience and a great chance to sort of get some feedback from some talented folks in the animation biz, which was really neat. So when it came to originally the Hallowoods, I was mostly sketching out characters in a college notebook binder at the time. And most of the character designs that I came up with for these, what would become the core cast of the Hallowoods, were originally designed to function in a simple animated show. So somewhere floating around, I do have animated style art for Lady Ethel, for Solomon, for Percy, for Diggory. And a lot of time went into their character designs and how they would move and what, how their faces would change shapes when they smiled or grimaced or something. And so there was a good bit of arts development that went into that, just idly, sketching away. And eventually I came to find that if I was going to try and animate it myself, you all would get a 60-second short every year or something. And so I knew that probably wasn't going to suit the scale of the show that I wanted to do. And so I waffled over a couple of other objects or avenues after that. I thought about doing a series of blog posts with illustrations. I thought about doing a graphic novel. And there's still some artifacts from these left in the behind the scenes posts on the Patreon that you can browse. But eventually I circled back around to writing a novel and then deciding that this would be a really bad novel. It would be a really bad, long, dense, hard to sell novel. It would be multiple 100,000 page books probably. And so eventually then it came over to the avenue of a fiction podcast where I could present that same content, that same written content, but in a way that was a little bit more engaging, that people would tune into weekly, that people could find easily, and that wouldn't be quite as dull as sitting down to read a half-hour blog post, which I guess is essentially fan fiction, and there's not a lot of money to be made in fan fiction. So that was kind of the onus for that. But I would love, especially sometime down the line, if we had the capability to do a Hallowoods TV adaptation, I think animated over live action would be a wonderful medium for it. Because I would love to pull in some influences from like Edward Gorey's art style, from shows like Over the Garden Wall. See if the Blasting Company's still around to do some music. That'd be great. They are, by the way. They do music for other things. Um, yeah, they. Trying to remember, did the Blasting Company do the music for Re Dracula? They might have. They've been involved with the fiction podcast recently. I need to go recall which one it was. But that said, yeah. And the Blasting Company, for the layman, is the musical group that did the soundtrack and several musical numbers for an animated show called Over the Garden Wall, which is a lovely, very short, very beautiful, very lovely piece of art. It's great for the Halloween season. It's kind of a folk horror tale, but presented to children on Cartoon Network. But it contained a lot of the same It contained an atmosphere I found really inspiring for that first wave of the Hallowoods, and especially when it came to presenting big scary monsters in a way that was still creepy. It didn't lose the creepy factor, but also made them welcoming or homey in some way. So I'm always looking over the shoulder of Enoch from that show. I love Enoch so much. So yeah, that said, I would love sometime down the line to an animated adaptation would be great. And I think it would lend itself pretty well. And I have a bit of a background knowledge in animation that would hopefully also like smooth that process out a little bit. I'm fairly good with storyboarding and understanding some of these, at least basic creative input things that I could help out with, character design, that sort of thing. So yeah, and I'm always looking to new shows. Like I haven't yet watched Scavenger's Reign, which I believe is on Netflix right now. I don't really keep up with the times, but although I haven't seen it from all of the fronts, it appears to be just gorgeous sci-fi body horror alien experience show, um, and really made for an adult watching audience. So I'm always looking at these things and going, and that could be a Hallowoods show pretty well if you squint and then just replaced some spaceships with boots to walk in the woods for several episodes straight. Um, let's see. A couple of more comments in the chat. Reading us a fantastic story. Thank you, Jin Penguin. Femme Fatale says, "Good day, everyone." Jin Penguin says, "Yes, I love gory. I think animation adaptations are extremely underrated. I'm seeing a lot more love or a lot more support, or maybe just a little bit of a renaissance of like adult animated projects that are trying to do something artistic or unusual or really take advantage of the medium in their own right. Um, like, uh, hmm, in a little bit of a different way than just your average like multi-season Family Guy sitcom or whatever. I again, not one that I've seen, only that I've seen clips of flying around, but I believe there's a show come out with the second season called Smiling Friends. I think that's the case. But what's impressed me with that is that they're pulling animation styles from different sources or combining them all into one sort of multi-medium world. So different characters have different animation styles. And a couple of those are the animation styles of the old cartoon Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit adaptations that I grew up on. The Hobbit cartoon just had really strange character designs with bulbous eyes and just gigantic hands and feet and tiny bodies and like very odd proportions in their character designs. But it's instantly recognizable if you've seen that piece of work. And then the other was, the Lord of the Rings adaptations of the time. They were all sort of terrifying form of animation that relies, I think, on rotoscoping. So the animation would be drawn right over the like outlines of actual people that they filmed. And in some frightening cases, you could see the people that they filmed underneath the lines. So there were some really nightmarish visuals that came out of that when it came to some of the orcs and ring wraiths and things. Um, and then on top of that, just like very unusual, blurry, odd movements that happen when you just trace directly over a real life person. And like the face bends and contorts and moves strangely as people move around. Um, and they didn't always remove errors from the footage they were tracing under. So they would. There's at least one scene in the Lord of the Rings animated adaptation, and I forget when it came out. It might have been like the 70s, where everyone is running and Aragorn trips the actor who's doing the motion like reference trips over his own sword, and it just gets drawn right into the like final animated version of the film. Just happens in the background, but you can still see it. Jin's regarding Scavenger's Reign says, I don't normally go much for sci-fi, and I was hooked. I've also, although I'm not sure it's quite the same vibe, but I've been reading a lot of Jeff Vandermeer, who is the author who wrote a book called Annihilation. Now, I haven't read Annihilation, but I have read his masterwork, which is a hefty volume called the Ambergris Trilogy, which is about the evolution of a city and the like sort of a fantasy fungal noir land where you get to see many different perspectives and watch this city grow and get infested over time and kind of go through these big epochs and historical events. And it's all very dense, but it's also just ingenious and scribbly written. So I've enjoyed it quite a bit. And it's definitely been sort of just coincidentally helpful reading material going into this latest season of the Hallowoods. Femme Fatale asks, if there were a TV series, would you still do all the voices? I can't picture any of the characters with different voices. No, I would not. I voice two characters in Hello from the Hallowoods. I voice Lady Ethel, and I voice Nicky Nick. And Nicky Nick, unfortunately, is reading everything else that happens in the story. But Lady Ethel and Nicky Nick are usually the only two who ever have access to the speaker that is essentially, they're the only two that ever have access to the mic. There's Lady Ethel and there's Nicky Nick telling you what's going on. Other than that, other people do get to approach the microphone on occasion. There's some interviews with Zizixes. A couple of other people have the power to speak in Dream, to use that microphone, more or less. There's a yellow tape recorder that speaks in Dream that's been floating around. And so I think a couple different people have owned that at various points and gotten some stories out of it. But most of the voices you hear canonically are Nicky Nick diegetically trying to narrate the story to you. So if it came to an animated adaptation, no, I would love to voice Nicky Nick. I would possibly voice Lady Ethel, but I wouldn't. I would be happy to let actual people voice the dozens of other characters that there are. I think some of them would be a little bit harder than others to do. I have yet to really meet anyone who does Diggory in a way that remotely sounds like what the narration sounds like for Diggory. But that would be something to tackle when we got there. Let's see. Jin Penguin says, I feel like people deeply miss 2D animation. Ooh, the Rankin and Bass style. Yes, I think it was the Rankin and Bass, as long as that's not the company that made the Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer stop motion animations, because that's a whole different thing. Although you couldn't, I could never make enough money to afford a stop motion Hallowoods show. That is like the most labor intensive, labor of love form of animation that there is. Um, but oh, that would be incredible. And stop motion is probably the one I'm most familiar with. I've made back in my younger years. I was a big stop motion enthusiast. I made lots of stop motion. I was big into Transformers at the time, and believe it or not, Transformers had a thriving stop motion animation scene where people would post episodes, sometimes weekly, sometimes monthly, with ongoing storylines and full voice casts of other amateur enthusiasts. So you can find me not by you all would be hard pressed to find me, but I did voice Starscream a couple of times. I've voiced I think I've voiced Barricade. I was a pretty good Barricade. Um, I think Optimus Prime on one occasion, but yeah, I got a kick out of that as a younger person. But I made one of these series, and so I put a good 3 or 4 episodes into this stop motion show. Yeah, and they were like 10-minute, 20-minute episodes in stop motion. But I mean, that taught me visual effects, that taught me editing, that taught me a number of different things. So that was very useful. It turned out to be a surprisingly time-consuming but productive hobby for me, and I've the audio and video skills, especially, have just been useful in so many other aspects since then. Let's see. Spider Verse animation, says Beanie. Beautiful, beautiful films. I adore those films. I cannot wait for them to come out with the rest of it. But just wonderful work. I love how they mix mediums there so effortlessly. And frankly, how they tell the only multiverse story I've ever been invested in and do it well. Fred Raider doesn't know what they missed out on. Well, maybe not, or maybe the rejection by Frederator helped to shape some of my creative flavors and understandings, and so gradually you learn with each rejection just a little bit better for next time. I don't think the stuff I submitted to Frederator was very good at the time. My characters, I think the biggest question that stood out to me from those meetings was I had gone on a long tangent about what one of my characters want, like all the plot related goals his character had to find out more about their parents, to get like a cool guitar. They were all like surface level things. And eventually, one of the executives was like, but what does your character actually want? And I couldn't answer that question. I beyond the surface level things of getting a new guitar or finding out about their parents, which is a terror. Never do that. Never write a story where they need to find out about their parents. It's so I've never seen it go well. But that said, that question had me stumped. I didn't have an answer. Um, I didn't understand really what the deeper drive was for this character, or what made them who they are, or what they internally wanted out of the world, why they wanted that guitar, why they wanted to find out about their parents. And that's the meat and bones of a character. So some of these conversations were good. It's good that show didn't get picked up, but it was also good to learn a little bit more about what makes a character tick. And I think that was really useful for going into writing projects forever afterwards. Let's see. Jin Penguin says, have you thought about who you'd want to voice the cast? A little bit. A little bit. There are some like actual audio drama actors that I'm still waiting to get for certain voice parts in the Hallowoods. So we'll see some of those when we come to it. I think for Percy in particular, I once had a nice conversation with Mal Blum, the music artist, who does a bunch of stuff for Welcome to Night Vale. And so I especially Mal was talking at the time about like being super interested in ghosts and trans allegories with ghosts, and it was like, this could be a great matchup. So maybe. But I think one of the things that I would hope to do with a lot of my work as well is hopefully prioritize queer actors, queer artists, people who haven't gotten their big moment in the spotlight yet. When it comes to guest collaborations and things, that's always something I'm looking out for. I'll have a chance to do it more as the platform grows. But that said, I wouldn't, if that ever comes the case, it'll probably be people who I would like to give a chance to be on the platform who don't always get a chance to be on the platform. So I wouldn't expect Chris Pratt to show up for any of those voices. Jin Penguin says, I think you were describing the Ralph Bashiki Lord of the Rings from what I recall of his style. Yes, that was it. Question from the Discord, says Beanie. Since Lem sounds exactly the same when Nick voices her as she does in her marketing segments, does that mean that Nick is just doing a brilliant impression when voicing her? Yes. Yes, it does. That's as much as we can. That's as much of a good answer as we will ever get on that plot point. Yes, imitation is the sincerest form of negativity. Archie says, would you accept fan art as a gift? The answer is yes, but I need to get a P.O. box first. I've never bothered with that so far, and I probably should open one up so that people can send things, because that would be cool, because I love fan art, but I don't have a good way to receive it yet. So go ahead and keep drawing, and I'll work on that eventually. I'll figure it out. And lastly, Brooks says, hello, first time catching stream after I caught up. Hello, thank you so much for joining in. This is the end of it, but I hope you've had a good time. And as always, please feel free to join us again in a future week for more Q&A questions. So we will be missing next week. I will be out of town and away from the desk, so it's really 2 weeks from now that we'll circle back for our next Q&A. But yes, thank you so much. And also, yes, there is a patrons in the patrons, like every one of these live streams shows up in Patreon. Every description in those posts has a link to an ask box. You could toss questions in there all throughout the next 2 weeks. And if you do, then it'll show up and I'll be able to answer them on a future stream. So that's how it works. Thank you so much, everybody. It's so lovely to see everyone in the chat today. Thank you for all the questions. I hope you continue to enjoy the next part of season 4 as we continue rolling forward and get to the kind of start building up to our finale for the end of the summer. So stay tuned and see you around the bend. Take care, everybody.